The rain hammered against the windows of our suburban Denver home as I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling around a cold cup of coffee. The morning news droned in the background, but all I could hear was the echo of last night's argument still ringing in my ears. 12 years of marriage, and it had come to this. "Rebecca, you need to understand something," my husband James had said, his voice cold as winter steel. "This business deal with Morrison Holdings is everything to me. Everything. If you can't support that, then maybe you should reconsider what you're doing here." I had tried to explain my concerns about the environmental impact reports I discovered in his files. As an environmental science professor at the University of Colorado, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. The proposed development would destroy wetlands that served as crucial habitat for migrating birds. But James had dismissed my expertise like it meant nothing. The memory of his words still stung. I picked up my phone and called my sister Lisa, who lived across town in the Cherry Creek area. "Becca, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" Lisa's voice was immediately concerned. "James and I think we're done, Lise. He's so consumed with this business deal that he's becoming someone I don't recognize. Yesterday, he told me my career was cute compared to his real estate empire. That's not the James the first know. Remember when you two first met at that charity fundraiser? He couldn't stop talking about how brilliant you were." I wiped away a tear, looking out at the autumn leaves scattered across our manicured lawn. That feels like a lifetime ago. Now he acts like I'm just some accessory to his success story. The sound of James's BMW pulling into the driveway cut our conversation short. "He's home. I should go. Call me later, okay? Promise me." I hung up just as James walked through the front door, his expensive suit wrinkled from another long day of meetings. He barely glanced at me as he loosened his tie. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning?" he asked, checking his phone messages. "Hello to you too, James. And no, I had 3 classes today and office hours until 7. He looked up with irritation. "Rebecca, I have the Morrison presentation tomorrow. This deal could set us up for life. The least you could do is help me look professional. The least I could do." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've been supporting your career for 12 years while building my own. I've moved twice for your business opportunities, delayed starting a family because of your timing, and now you want me to be your personal assistant too." James set down his briefcase with more force than necessary. "You know what your problem is? You have no vision. This Morrison deal isn't just about money. It's about legacy. It's about building something that matters. And destroying protected wetlands matters. How exactly?" His face darkened. "Here we go again with your tree-hugging nonsense. Do you have any idea how many jobs this development will create? How many families it will help?" "James, I've read the environmental impact reports, the ones your company tried to bury. This isn't about jobs, it's about cutting corners for maximum profit. You went through my files." His voice was dangerously quiet. "They were on your desk. I was looking for a pen, and you had no right." He exploded, his face red with anger. "Those are confidential business documents. Confidential because they show your company plans to illegally dump construction waste in Silver Creek? Because they reveal you've been bribing city officials to fast-track permits." The silence that followed was deafening. James stared at me with a look I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, almost predatory. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "And even if you did, it wouldn't matter. This deal is happening whether you like it or not. James, please, think about what you're saying. This isn't the man I married. The man I married cared about doing the right thing. The man you married was naive." He slammed his hand on the kitchen counter, making me jump. "I've learned how the world really works, Rebecca. It's about power and money, not your idealistic fantasies about saving every damn bird in Colorado." Tears stung my eyes. "So what does that make me in your life? What's my place in this world you've discovered? James looked at me with a mixture of contempt and pity that cut deeper than any blade. Honestly, you're nothing to me. Nothing. You're an obstacle to everything I'm trying to build. Maybe it's time you accepted that and moved on. The words hung in the air like poison. I felt something inside me break, but not in the way he intended. Instead of crumbling, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. You're right, I said quietly. It is time I moved on. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and began packing a suitcase. James didn't follow me. I could hear him on the phone downstairs, probably calling his business partner Kevin about tomorrow's presentation, as if nothing had happened. As I folded my clothes, I thought about the woman I used to be before James convinced me to make our marriage the center of my universe. I had been offered a research position at Stanford 5 years ago, a dream job studying climate change impacts on bird migration patterns. James had persuaded me to turn it down, saying we needed to focus on building our life together in Colorado. Now I realized he had meant building his life, with me as a convenient supporting character. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague, Dr. Patricia Williams, at the university. Emergency faculty meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. The administration wants to discuss the Morrison Holdings situation. Your expertise is crucial. I stared at the message, a plan beginning to form in my mind. James thought I was nothing. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. I grabbed my laptop and environmental reports I'd copied earlier. If James wanted to play hardball with protected wetlands and endangered species, he'd picked the wrong opponent. The rain continued to pound against the windows as I finished packing. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and I couldn't help but think it sounded like the approaching storm of consequences James had never seen coming. Tomorrow he would give his presentation to Morrison Holdings. Tomorrow I would give mine to the university administration, the State Environmental Protection Agency, and if necessary, the FBI. I looked back at the house we'd built together, the house filled with memories of who we used to be, and felt surprisingly little sadness. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you really are. As I loaded my car, I caught sight of James through the kitchen window, still on his phone, gesturing animatedly about profit margins and development timelines. He had no idea that his nothing wife was about to become his biggest nightmare. The drive to Lisa's house felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. The university's administration building felt different that morning as I walked through the marble hallways carrying my briefcase full of evidence. Dr. Williams had assembled an impressive group for the emergency meeting. The dean, 2 professors from the law school, a representative from the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, and someone I didn't recognize, a woman in a sharp navy suit who introduced herself as Agent Rebecca Torres from the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division. Thank you all for coming, Dr. Williams began. As you know, the proposed Morrison Holdings development threatens the Silver Creek wetlands, which our ornithology department has been studying for the past decade. Professor Rebecca Martinez has discovered some disturbing information that we need to address immediately. My heart pounded as I stood to present my findings. Strange how my married name had become Martinez Clark, but everyone still called me by my maiden name in professional settings. It felt like a sign. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you represents not just environmental destruction, but criminal activity. I opened my laptop and projected the first document. This internal memo from Morrison Holdings explicitly discusses falsifying soil contamination reports. Agent Torres leaned forward, her attention sharp. Where did you obtain these documents, Professor Martinez? My husband is James Clark, Morrison Holdings' primary legal counsel and development coordinator. These were on his home desk. The room fell silent. Dr. Williams looked uncomfortable. Rebecca, you understand this puts you in a difficult position legally and personally. I understand perfectly, but I took an oath as a scientist to pursue truth regardless of personal cost. These wetlands support over 40 species of migratory birds, some of which are on the endangered species list. The economic impact of destroying this ecosystem would be felt for generations. Agent Torres took notes as I continued. This document shows they plan to dump construction debris directly into Silver Creek, then cover it with imported soil to hide the contamination. They've also bribed City Councilman Rodriguez to expedite permits without proper environmental review. The law professor, Dr. Kenneth Roberts, spoke up. Professor Martinez, these are serious criminal allegations. Are you prepared to testify in federal court if necessary? Before I could answer, my phone rang. James's name flashed on the screen. The room watched as I declined the call. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to stop this. Agent Torres stood. I need to make some calls. Professor Martinez, would you be willing to come to our field office this afternoon to make a formal statement? Of course. As the meeting dispersed, Dr. Williams approached me privately. Rebecca, I admire your courage, but are you sure about this? Once you cross this line, there's no going back. James is well connected in this city. I thought about his words the night before. You're nothing to me. The memory strengthened my resolve. Patricia, I've spent 12 years compromising my principles to support his career. I'm done being nothing. My phone buzzed with several missed calls from James. Finally, I answered. Where the hell are you? His voice was strained, angry. The Morrison presentation is in 2 hours, and there are FBI agents at my office asking questions about environmental reports. Did you? He paused, realization dawning. You did this. You called the feds on your own husband. I called them on a criminal enterprise that happens to employ my husband. I corrected. There's a difference. Rebecca, you have no idea what you've done. Do you know how much money is involved in this deal? How many important people have investments riding on this? Exactly my point, James. This isn't just about cutting a few corners. This is organized criminal activity involving public corruption. I could lose everything. My career, my reputation, my freedom. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. You told me I was nothing to you, so my actions shouldn't matter, should they? The silence stretched between us. When he spoke again, his voice was differente, smaller, almost pleading. Becca, please. We can work this out. Come home. Let's talk about this rationally. It's too late for that conversation, James. You made your choice when you decided your illegal profits mattered more than everything else. The house, Rebecca. Think about the house. Our life together. Are you really willing to throw it all away? I pulled into the parking lot of the EPA field office. You threw it away the moment you forgot who we used to be. Goodbye, James. Inside the federal building, Agent Torres led me to a sterile conference room where I spent the next 4 hours detailing everything I knew about Morrison Holdings' illegal activities. The evidence was overwhelming: falsified environmental reports, bribery, illegal dumping plans, and conspiracy to defraud the federal government of millions in environmental cleanup costs. This is an excellent case, Professor Martinez, Agent Torres said as we finished. Your husband's company was sloppy. They left digital fingerprints everywhere. We'll have warrants by tomorrow morning. What happens to James? That depends on his level of cooperation. As lead legal counsel, he's facing serious federal charges. But if he's willing to testify against Morrison and the other conspirators, she didn't need to finish the sentence. James would have to choose between his loyalty to Morrison Holdings and his own freedom. As I drove home through the late afternoon Denver traffic, my phone rang again. This time it was my sister Lisa. Becca, I just saw the news. FBI raids at Morrison Holdings? Please tell me you're okay. I'm better than okay, Lise. I'm free. What does this mean for you and James? I pulled into our driveway and saw James's BMW wasn't there. It means I'm about to find out who I am when I'm not busy being nothing to someone else. Inside the house, I found a note on the kitchen counter written in James's familiar handwriting. Rebecca, I've gone to stay at Kevin's while I figure this out. The lawyers say the house might be seized as part of the investigation since it was purchased with Morrison money. I hope you're happy with what you've done. Jay. I crumpled the note and threw it away. Then I called my old mentor from graduate school, Dr. Sarah Chin at Stanford. She had been trying to recruit me for a new climate research project for months. Rebecca, what a pleasant surprise. Have you reconsidered our offer? Actually, Sarah, I think I'm ready to discuss it seriously now. My situation in Denver has changed dramatically. Wonderful. When can you visit Palo Alto? We have so much to catch up on. As we talked about research opportunities and new beginnings, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about my own future. For the first time in over a decade, I was making decisions based on my own dreams rather than accommodating someone else's. That evening, Lisa came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. So, she said as we sat on the couch, walk me through what happens now. Honestly, I have no idea. The house might be seized. James might go to prison. My marriage is definitely over. But you know what's strange? I'm not scared. Lisa studied my face. You look different. Younger somehow. I feel like myself again. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Remember when we were kids and you used to spend hours in the backyard studying birds with Dad's binoculars? You had this intensity, this passion for understanding how the world worked. I haven't seen that fire in your eyes for years. I sipped my wine, watching the sunset paint the Denver skyline in shades of gold and pink. James spent so long convincing me that my dreams were small compared to his vision that I started believing it. But saving an ecosystem isn't small. Standing up for what's right isn't small. What will you do if they seize the house? Start over. Maybe that's exactly what I need. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Mrs. Clark? This is attorney Margaret Foster from Foster, Klein and Associates. I represent the victims' Rights Foundation in environmental crimes. Could we meet tomorrow to discuss your role as a whistleblower in the Morrison Holdings case? I suppose so. What kind of discussion? The kind that might change your life, Mrs. Clark, in the best possible way. After I hung up, Lisa raised her wine glass. To new beginnings. To remembering who we really are, I countered. As we toasted, I realized that James had been right about one thing. This was about legacy, just not the kind he had envisioned. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, legal proceedings, and difficult choices. But tonight, for the first time in years, I fell asleep excited about what the future might hold. Attorney Margaret Foster's office overlooked downtown Denver's financial district, and as I sat in her elegant conference room the next morning, I could see the Morrison Holdings building in the distance. FBI vehicles were still parked outside, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness watching federal agents carry boxes of evidence from the building where my husband had worked for the past 8 years. Professor Martinez, Attorney Foster began, spreading documents across the polished conference table. Your actions as a whistleblower have uncovered one of the largest environmental fraud schemes in Colorado history. The federal government is very interested in ensuring your cooperation continues. I'm committed to seeing this through, I replied, though I was puzzled why a victim's rights attorney wanted to meet with me rather than the prosecutors. Excellent, but that's not actually why I asked you here today. She smiled mysteriously. I represent the estate of Eleanor Morrison. I blinked in confusion. Morrison? As in Morrison Holdings. Eleanor was Harrison Morrison's aunt. She died 6 months ago at the age of 87. Are you familiar with her environmental activism work? I had heard the name in academic circles. She funded bird migration research, didn't she? The Eleanor Morrison Foundation grants. among many other things. Eleanor was passionate about protecting Colorado's natural habitats. She was also extremely wealthy and very concerned about what her nephew Harrison was doing with the family business. Attorney Foster opened a thick legal folder. Before her death, Eleanor had been investigating Morrison Holdings' activities. She hired private investigators and discovered the same illegal activities you've now exposed. She was preparing to take action against her own nephew when she passed away. I'm sorry for her loss, but I don't understand why you're telling me this. Because Professor Martinez, Eleanor left very specific instructions in her will. She had been following your academic work for years. Your research on climate change impacts on bird populations caught her attention. She believed you were exactly the kind of person who should be fighting against environmental destruction. My pulse quickened. What kind of instructions? Attorney Foster slid a legal document across the table. Eleanor Morrison left you her entire personal estate, valued at approximately $12 million, along with specific instructions that the money be used to combat environmental crimes and support researchers who risk their careers to protect natural habitats. I stared at the document, unable to process the words. That's impossible. I never met her. Why would she? Because she spent the last 2 years of her life watching you. She attended several of your university lectures under assumed names. She read every paper you published. When she learned you were married to James Clark, Morrison Holdings legal counsel, she became fascinated by what she called your moral dilemma. She was watching me, not stalking. Attorney Foster clarified quickly. Eleanor was a brilliant strategic thinker. She recognized that someone in your unique position with access to inside information and the scientific credibility to expose environmental crimes might be the key to stopping her nephew's illegal activities. I thought about the past few months, how isolated I'd felt, how James had made me question my own judgment about the environmental impacts. She was betting I'd do the right thing. She was investing in your character. And yesterday, when you provided evidence to the FBI, you proved her faith was justified. The magnitude hit me suddenly. $12 million, plus the Morrison family's original homestead property in Golden, approximately 500 acres of pristine mountain land that Eleanor protected from development. She wanted it preserved as a wildlife sanctuary and research station. I felt dizzy. I can't accept this. It's too much. Actually, you can't refuse it. Eleanor structured the bequest as a charitable trust with you as the sole trustee. The money must be used for environmental protection and education. You can pay yourself a reasonable salary for managing the trust, but the bulk of the funds must serve Eleanor's mission. My phone buzzed with yet another call from James. I ignored it. There's more, Attorney Foster continued. Eleanor also left detailed evidence files documenting Morrison Holdings' crimes going back 15 years. This information will be crucial for the federal prosecution. She was building a case against her own family. Eleanor Morrison was 91 when she immigrated to America from Ireland. She spent her life believing in justice and environmental stewardship. Harrison's crimes betrayed everything she valued. I walked to the window, looking down at the FBI vehicles outside Morrison Holdings. James has no idea, does he? About Eleanor's investigation. No one in the company knew. Eleanor was very discreet. My phone rang again, James. This time I answered. Rebecca, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. The FBI froze all of Morrison's accounts. My salary, our joint accounts, everything. I can't even access our savings to pay the mortgage. James, I'm in a lawyer's office. I can't talk right now. What lawyer? Rebecca, please, I know you're angry, but we need to stick together through this. The federal prosecutors want me to testify against Harrison Morrison. If I cooperate, they might reduce my charges. I looked back at Attorney Foster, who was watching my conversation with interest. Do what you think is right, James, just like I did. But what about the house? If I testify, Morrison will retaliate. He has connections everywhere. We could lose everything. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what really matters. I ended the call and returned to the conference table. Professor Martinez, Attorney Foster said gently, I know this is overwhelming. You don't have to make any decisions today about the trust, but there is one time-sensitive matter. She produced another document. Your house. My heart sank. The FBI is seizing it, aren't they? Actually, no. Eleanor anticipated this situation. 6 months ago, using information from her private investigators, she purchased your mortgage from Denver First National Bank. Technically, she owns your house. I sat down heavily. I don't understand. Eleanor's will states that if you accept the trustee position for her environmental foundation, the house becomes yours free and clear. If you decline, it will be sold and the proceeds donated to the Sierra Club. The room spun around me. In 24 hours, I had gone from being nothing to inheriting more money than I could have earned in several lifetimes. Why didn't Eleanor contact me directly? Why all the secrecy? Because she needed to know you would do the right thing without any external incentives. If you had known about the inheritance, your decision to expose Morrison Holdings might have been questioned as self-serving rather than principled. I thought about my conversation with James the night before, when he had dismissed me as nothing. If only he could see me now. But then I felt ashamed of the thought. This wasn't about revenge or proving him wrong. This was about having the resources to do meaningful work protecting the environment. What would Eleanor expect from me as trustee? Continue your research. Fund other scientists fighting environmental crimes. Support legal challenges to corporate pollution. Use your platform to educate the public. Essentially, become the advocate she always wanted to be, but could never be because of her family connections. I picked up the legal documents, feeling their weight. And James? What happens to him? That's between him and the federal prosecutors. But Professor Martinez, you should know that Eleanor's files contain evidence of his direct involvement in the illegal activities. He wasn't just Morrison Holdings' lawyer, he was an active participant in the conspiracy. The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it still hurt. The man I had married would never have participated in environmental crimes. But people change, and apparently James had changed more than I realized. I need time to think about this. Of course, take all the time you need. But Eleanor did leave you a personal letter. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in elegant handwriting. I opened it carefully. Dear Professor Martinez, it began, if you are reading this, then you have proven yourself to be the person I believed you to be. Environmental protection requires courage, and courage often demands personal sacrifice. I hope my bequest will allow you to continue fighting for what matters without worrying about the personal cost. The natural world needs advocates who cannot be bought, intimidated, or silenced. I believe you are such a person. Use these resources well. Eleanor Morrison. I looked up at Attorney Foster, tears in my eyes. She really believed in me. She believed in the power of one person to make a difference. The question now is, do you believe it too? I thought about the past 12 years, how I had gradually allowed my own dreams to become secondary to James's ambitions, how I had accepted being nothing rather than fighting to be something. Yes, I said quietly. I do believe it. Then welcome to your new life, Professor Martinez. Eleanor Morrison just gave you the resources to change the world. As I walked out of the law office, carrying the documents that would transform my existence, I realized that James had been right about one thing. Yesterday had been about losing everything. But sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding out who you're meant to become. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Sarah Chen at Stanford. Rebecca, I just read about the Morrison Holdings investigation. Are you okay? The job offer still stands whenever you're ready. For the first time in years, I had choices. Real choices. And every single one of them led toward the person I had always been meant to be. 3 months later, I stood in the renovated barn on Eleanor Morrison's property in Golden, watching as contractors installed the final pieces of equipment for what would become the Morrison Environmental Research Center. The view from the large windows was breathtaking rolling hills covered in aspen and pine trees, with the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance. Eleanor had chosen this land well. My phone rang, and I saw James's name on the screen. We had spoken only twice since the FBI arrests, both conversations related to our divorce proceedings. I answered, curious about what he needed now. "Rebecca." His voice sounded differente, humbler, tired. "I wanted to call before the sentencing hearing tomorrow. How are you holding up, James?" "As well as can be expected for someone facing 5 years in federal prison." He paused. "I heard about the Morrison inheritance. $12 million. I have to admit, that's quite a turn of events. Eleanor Morrison believed in environmental protection. I'm just carrying out her wishes." "Right. The research center. I saw the article in the Denver Post about your work with the EPA. You're becoming quite famous." I walked outside onto the deck that overlooked the sanctuary. 3 deer were grazing in the meadow below, and I could hear birdsong from at least a dozen species. It's not about fame, James. It's about doing work that matters. "I know, and I know I have no right to ask, but I wanted to apologize. Not just for the criminal activity that's between me and the federal court, but for how I treated you, for making you feel like you didn't matter." The apology surprised me. "What changed your mind?" "Prison gives you time to think. My cellmate is a former environmental lawyer who went to prison for taking bribes from oil companies. He told me something that stuck with me. He said the worst part wasn't losing his freedom. It was remembering who he used to be before the money corrupted him." I listened, saying nothing. "I used to be proud of being married to you, Rebecca. Your integrity, your intelligence, your passion for protecting the environment. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing those qualities as obstacles to what I wanted instead of reasons why I fell in love with you." "James, let me finish, please. I know our marriage is over. I know I destroyed that. But I wanted you to know that seeing you stand up to Morrison Holdings, even knowing it would cost you everything, reminded me of the woman I married. You're not nothing, Rebecca. You never were. I was just too blinded by greed to see it." After I hung up, I sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Lisa found me there an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a stack of mail. "The divorce papers came today," she said, handing me an envelope. "Also, you got a letter from Stanford." I opened the letter from Dr. Sarachin first. "They're offering me a joint appointment," I told Lisa. "I'd spend part of the year at Stanford and part of the year running the research center here in Colorado. Best of both worlds. Are you going to take it?" "I think so. Eleanor's trust can fund graduate students and research associates to help manage the center when I'm in California." Lisa settled into the chair beside me. "You know, I haven't seen you this happy in years. Maybe ever. I feel like I'm finally living the life I was supposed to live. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. Remember when we were teenagers, and you used to talk about becoming a famous environmental scientist who would save endangered species and fight corporate polluters?" I laughed. I had big dreams. "You still do. You're just finally in a position to make them reality." My phone buzzed with a call from Attorney Foster. "Professor Martinez, I have interesting news. Harrison Morrison wants to meet with you." "Morrison? The nephew? Why would he want to meet with me?" "His lawyers think a public endorsement from you might help his case. He's hoping to negotiate a plea deal that would avoid prison time in exchange for cooperating with environmental regulators." "Absolutely not. I'm not helping him escape consequences for environmental crimes." "I thought you'd say that, but there's more. Morrison Holdings is facing bankruptcy due to the legal costs and frozen assets. Harrison wants to donate the company's undeveloped land holdings to your foundation in exchange for your support. I considered this. How much land? Approximately 3,000 acres across Colorado, including several parcels adjacent to state parks and wildlife preserves. The offer was tempting from a conservation standpoint, but I couldn't ignore the ethical implications. Margaret, I'll consider taking the land if it's offered as part of a criminal restitution agreement approved by the federal court. But I won't provide any public support for reducing Harrison Morrison's sentence. He needs to face the full consequences of his actions. I'll convey your position to his attorneys. After ending the call, I walked through the research center, checking on the various projects already underway. Dr. Patricia Williams had taken a sabbatical from the university to help establish the center's bird migration monitoring program. 2 graduate students were analyzing water quality data from Silver Creek, documenting the environmental damage that Morrison Holdings had planned to cause. The work felt meaningful in a way that my previous academic research never had. Instead of just studying environmental problems, we were actively working to prevent them. That evening, I video called my parents in Phoenix to update them on the research center's progress. Mija, my mother said, we're so proud of what you've accomplished. Your father and I were talking about how you used to bring home injured birds when you were little, insisting we help them recover. She wanted to be a veterinarian for wild animals, my father added. I guess in a way, you're still healing wounded creatures, just on a larger scale. After the call, I walked outside to enjoy the crisp mountain air. The night sky was spectacular here, far from Denver's light pollution. I could see the Milky Way stretching across the heavens, and I thought about Eleanor Morrison looking up at these same stars, dreaming of a world where people like her nephew couldn't destroy natural habitats for profit. My phone rang one more time, Dr. Sarah Chin calling from Stanford. Rebecca, I just finished reading your research proposal for the joint appointment. It's extraordinary. The combination of field research, policy advocacy, and public education could revolutionize how we approach environmental protection. Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited about the possibilities. I have to ask, are you completely sure about giving up tenure at University of Colorado? You'd be taking a risk coming to Stanford. I looked out at the moonlit landscape, listening to the sounds of owls and coyotes in the distance. Sarah, a year ago, I thought security meant staying in a comfortable job and a stable marriage, even when both were slowly killing my spirit. I've learned that real security comes from knowing you're doing work that aligns with your values. Well said. I'll send the contract tomorrow. After hanging up, I realized I had forgotten to check the rest of my mail. Among the bills and professional correspondence, I found an envelope with familiar handwriting James's. Inside was a short note and a set of house keys. Rebecca, I know the house technically belongs to you now through Eleanor's estate, but I wanted to formally return these keys as a symbolic gesture. The house should belong to someone who appreciates what we built there, even if I lost sight of that along the way. I've removed my personal belongings. Everything else is yours. I hope someday you can think of the good memories we made there without too much sadness. James. I held the keys in my hand, thinking about the 12 years James and I had shared in that house. The dinner parties where we discussed our dreams for the future. The quiet Sunday mornings, reading newspapers and drinking coffee. The moments of genuine partnership before his career ambitions overshadowed everything else. But I also thought about the woman I had become in the months since leaving that house. The research center, the Stanford appointment, the sense of purpose that filled every day with meaning. Tomorrow, I would drive to Denver and put the house on the market. The proceeds would go into Eleanor's trust to fund more environmental research and advocacy. It felt like the right way to honor both the good memories and the need to move forward. As I prepared for bed in the small apartment I had built in the research center's upper level, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I had been nothing to my husband. Now I had the resources and platform to make a real difference in protecting the environment. But the most important change wasn't the money or the property or even the prestigious job offers. It was the recognition that my values, my expertise, and my passion for environmental protection were not small things to be accommodated around someone else's ambitions. They were the foundation of a meaningful life. I fell asleep listening to the sounds of the wilderness beyond my windows, owls calling to their mates, wind rustling through aspen leaves, the distant howl of a coyote pack. These were the voices Eleanor Morrison had protected with her bequest. These were the creatures whose habitat James's company had planned to destroy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new research projects, new opportunities to fight for environmental protection. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be exactly where I belonged. The woman who had been dismissed as nothing had found everything she never knew she was looking for. 5 years later, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Stanford office as I reviewed the final draft of my book, From Nothing to Everything: How One Woman's Stand Against Environmental Crime Changed Federal Policy. The publisher wanted it released before the 5th anniversary of the Morrison Holdings case, which had become a landmark example of successful environmental whistleblowing. My assistant knocked on the door. "Professor Martinez, your interview with 60 Minutes is in an hour, and Dr. Chun wanted to remind you about the board meeting this afternoon." "Thank you, Monica. Any word from Washington about the Clean Waters Protection Act?" Senator Williams called this morning. The bill passed committee and should reach the Senate floor next week. She credits your testimony last month as the turning point. I smiled, remembering the nervous graduate student I used to be, afraid to speak up in faculty meetings. Now I regularly testified before Congress about environmental policy, and lawmakers actually listened. The research center in Golden had expanded dramatically over the past 5 years. Eleanor's original $12 million had grown to over $40 million through careful investments and additional donations from supporters inspired by our work. We now employed 37 researchers and had field offices in 5 states, all focused on preventing environmental crimes before they occurred. But the real measure of success wasn't money or recognition. It was the measurable impact. The Morrison case had led to 17 additional criminal prosecutions, resulting in over $200 million in environmental restoration funds. Silver Creek was now a protected wildlife refuge, home to endangered species that would have been destroyed by the original development plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Saw the preview of your 60 Minutes interview online. Mom would be so proud." Our mother had passed away 2 years earlier, but not before seeing her daughter become what she had always called a force of nature in fighting for nature. The irony wasn't lost on me that James had been partially right about legacy, just not the kind he had envisioned. My work had created a lasting impact that would protect ecosystems for generations. His illegal activities had resulted in 5 years in federal prison and a lifetime ban from the securities industry. I had visited him once during his incarceration, not out of romantic nostalgia, but because Dr. Patricia Williams, now the Research Center's co-director, had convinced me that forgiveness was essential for my own peace of mind. "You look good," James had said during that prison visit. "Happy. I am happy. And I hope you find your way to happiness, too, eventually. I've been thinking about what I'll do when I get out. My lawyer thinks I could teach business ethics at a community college. Ironic, right? Not ironic. Appropriate. Who better to teach about the consequences of unethical behavior than someone who lived through them? Now, preparing for the 60 Minutes interview, I thought about how that conversation with James had marked a turning point in my own healing. Forgiveness hadn't meant excusing his crimes or pretending our marriage hadn't been damaged by his choices. It had meant releasing the anger that was taking up space I needed for more productive emotions. Monica returned with my schedule for the day. "Professor Martinez, there's also a call holding from the White House Environmental Council. Something about the new National Wildlife Protection Initiative. My heart raced. I had been hoping for months that the administration would consider our research center's policy recommendations for expanding federal environmental protections. Put them through. Professor Martinez? This is Rachel Torres, Director of the White House Environmental Council. The President would like to meet with you next week to discuss your appointment as Special Advisor for Environmental Crime Prevention. I sat down heavily in my chair. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The President has been following your work since the Morrison case. With the new legislation moving through Congress, we need someone with your expertise to help implement federal environmental crime prevention programs. The position would be part-time, allowing you to continue your work at Stanford and the Research Center. After the call ended, I walked to my office window, looking out at the Stanford campus where students hurried between classes, many of them studying environmental science and policy. Some of these students would go on to become the next generation of environmental advocates, armed with better tools and stronger legal protections than my generation had possessed. The 60 Minutes interview that afternoon covered the Morrison case, but the interviewer, Leslie Stahl, was more interested in the personal transformation than the legal details. Professor Martinez, 5 years ago, your husband told you that you were nothing to him. How does it feel to now be considered one of the most influential environmental advocates in America? I considered the question carefully. Leslie, I think the most important thing I learned is that no one can make you nothing unless you accept their definition of your worth. James's words hurt deeply at the time, but they also forced me to examine what I really valued and who I wanted to be. Do you think you would have found this path if your marriage hadn't ended? That's impossible to know, but I can say that sometimes what feels like losing everything is actually the beginning of finding everything you were meant to become. What would you say to women who are in similar situations feeling diminished or dismissed by partners who don't value their contributions? I looked directly into the camera. I would say that your dreams, your expertise, your values, they're not small things to be accommodated around someone else's life. They're the foundation of your own meaningful existence. Sometimes you have to risk losing what feels safe to discover what's actually worth having. After the interview, I drove back to Golden to check on the Research Center's latest project, a comprehensive study of mining industry environmental compliance across the western United States. Dr. Williams had assembled a team of investigators working with federal prosecutors to identify patterns of illegal activity before they could cause irreversible damage. Rebecca! Patricia called as I entered the main research facility. You need to see this. She led me to a wall covered with maps, photographs, and data charts tracking environmental crimes across 12 states. We've identified what appears to be a coordinated network of mining companies falsifying safety reports and dumping toxic waste in remote areas. It's bigger than Morrison Holdings ever was. I studied the evidence, feeling the familiar combination of outrage and determination that had driven my work for the past 5 years. Have you contacted Agent Torres at the EPA? She's flying out from Washington tomorrow. Rebecca, this could be the biggest environmental crime case in U.S. history. Looking at the scope of the investigation, I realized that my work was far from finished. The Morrison case had been just the beginning, a proof of concept that individual citizens with expertise and courage could take on powerful corporate interests and win. That evening, I called Lisa to share the news about the White House appointment offer. Special advisor to the president, she repeated. Becca, do you realize how incredible this is? 5 years ago, you were packing a suitcase, wondering where you were going to live. I know. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. What does this mean for your life in California? I'll probably split my time between Washington, Stanford, and the Research Center. It's complicated, but it's good complicated. The kind of complicated that comes from having meaningful choices rather than no choices at all. After hanging up, I walked outside to the deck where I had sat countless evenings over the past 5 years, watching the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains. The deer still grazed in the meadow below, and the bird population had actually increased as our conservation efforts protected more habitat. My phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Sarah Chin. "Rebecca, I just heard about the White House appointment. Stanford is incredibly proud to have you on our faculty. You've shown that academic research can have real-world impact when combined with courage and integrity." As I prepared for bed, I thought about Eleanor Morrison and the calculated risk she had taken in leaving her fortune to a stranger. She had believed that one person with the right resources and motivation could make a difference in protecting the environment. 5 years later, her investment had generated returns she never could have imagined. The Morrison Environmental Research Center had become a model for environmental advocacy organizations nationwide. Federal environmental crime prosecutions had increased by 400% since the Morrison case established new precedents for whistleblower protections and criminal penalties. But perhaps most importantly, hundreds of graduate students and young professionals had been inspired to pursue careers in environmental protection, knowing that their work could lead to meaningful change rather than just academic publications. I fell asleep that night thinking about the woman I had been 5 years earlier isolated, dismissed, convinced that her concerns about environmental protection were less important than maintaining domestic peace. That woman could never have imagined the life I was living now. Sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to discover everything you were meant to become. The next morning would bring new challenges, new investigations, and new opportunities to protect the natural world that had given me purpose when I needed it most. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be living proof that one person really can change the world if they're willing to risk everything to become who they're meant to be. In the distance, a great horned owl called to its mate, and I smiled, remembering the shy graduate student who used to study bird migration patterns in her spare time. She had grown up to become exactly who she was always meant to be,